City of Chino Public Safety Roads Essential Services Measure. This item is to adopt Resolution 2023-071, declaring a fiscal emergency, and Resolution 2023-072, calling the special municipal election for the City of Chino Public Safety Roads Essential Services Measure. I'd like to ask for a staff report from our City Manager, Linda Reich.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Tonight I come before you to discuss a very serious matter affecting our city's future. Our city prides itself on being fiscally sound and highly responsible with the public funds entrusted to us. Our employees work diligently to provide the very best programs and services possible with the resources allocated. We have saved for a rainy day, accumulating over $73 million in reserves. We weathered the Great Recession and the COVID-19 pandemic, all while doing our best to be good stewards of the people's money. While the city has been fiscally responsible, our revenues have not kept pace with the rising cost to provide essential services. Additionally, infrastructure needs and the increased cost of deferred maintenance on our streets, parks, public facilities has put Chino's financial stability at risk. Today, everything costs more for everyone, and cities are not immune. Despite our efforts to keep our expenditures in line with existing revenues, this won't simply be possible in the future given the escalating costs of materials, labor, and services that are required to provide our residents and businesses the quality services they deserve and are accustomed to receiving. While the city's revenues have increased over time, our operating costs have increased exponentially, significantly outpacing our revenues. At the City Council's direction, this has required the city to use general fund reserves, which is equal to the city's savings account. As we look ahead, based on our projected revenues and expenditures, the city's reserves will be depleted by fiscal year 28-29 or sooner. Staff has carefully reviewed our revenue projections and examined our expenditures in great detail to determine how to best balance our budgets in the future. To reduce expenditures, we have delayed filling positions, eliminated programs, scaled back services, delayed projects, and deferred maintenance and repairs. With each of these reductions in expenditures, there have been impacts to our community that our staff has tried to minimize and mitigate. But even with these cuts and other contemplated reductions, expenditures will escalate beyond our revenues. The fact is, either we make significant cuts to reduce operational expenditures, which means cutting the services and programs we provide and cutting back on maintenance of our parks, facilities, streets, and equipment, or we secure additional revenue. On the revenue side, we have applied for and obtained grants, audited receipts to make sure we're getting the money we are entitled to, promoted economic development, obtained sponsorships, advocated regionally and at the state and federal level for resources, and continually monitored and adjusted our investments to maximize our earnings. While these have contributed to our revenues, the increases don't come close to offsetting the escalating costs to meet the community's needs. To address this structural imbalance in our budget, we also reviewed the various tax revenues available to the city. In reviewing these, we assessed numerous factors, including the impact on our residents and businesses, how the tax affects different sectors of our community, the proportion to which they benefit Chino versus other jurisdictions, who pays them, and the amount generated. After assessing the revenue options, and to continue to provide essential services like police, 911 emergency medical response, street repair, clean local drinking water, clean and safe public areas, while addressing homelessness and maintaining senior, veteran, and youth programming, a 1-cent sales tax increase is the best option available to the city. Action is needed to protect Chino's future. In order to protect our future and maintain all that Chino residents and businesses have come to expect from us, staff is asking the council to declare a fiscal emergency and approve the placement of a 1% sales tax measure on the March 5th, 2024 ballot for voter consideration. This will allow Chino's voters to decide whether to authorize the 1% sales tax increase to provide a more financially secure future for Chino. We do not take this request lightly. Tonight, you will hear from several city department directors who have evaluated our current and future financial situation and will report on the detrimental impacts the city faces without additional revenues. First, I'd like to introduce our Director of Finance, Rob Burns, to discuss the fiscal emergency that we are facing today.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. In June of this year, the city adopted a 2-year budget. Contained in that budget was a 10-year projection that you see on your screen. The top portion of the projection focuses on ongoing activities, while the bottom portion shows one-time activities. The yellow band at the bottom shows the running fund balance, or the general fund reserves. You can see that given the current projections, the city's general fund reserves will be exhausted in fiscal year 28-29. That's the red numbers at the bottom. The city's financial situation has actually gotten worse since June, when the city budget was adopted. Finalized numbers for last fiscal year 22-23, show an ongoing loss of $1.5 million due to lower property taxes and development revenue. Additionally, development revenue is likely to be under budget this year by almost $4 million if the currently slow housing market remains unchanged. The combination of these reduced revenues will deplete general fund reserves 1 year earlier than previously anticipated. Therefore, we now estimate that city reserves will be exhausted by fiscal year 27-28. Next slide. So this slide represents our ongoing revenues versus expenditures over the last 4 years of actuals and 2 years contained in the budget. You can see ongoing revenues exceed expenditures until fiscal year 22-23. For 22-23, as I just mentioned, ongoing expenditures now exceed ongoing revenues by $1.5 million. That's the gold bar with the red outline on it. Fiscal years 23-24 and 24-25 are projected to have deficits of $5.7 million and $7.1 million, respectively. Now, if we look at percentage increases of ongoing revenues versus expenditures, you'll see on the left-hand side that over the last 4 years, expenditures have grown, again, the gold bar, by 23.3%, while revenues have only grown by 19.6%. This percentage difference represents about $2.7 million more in expenditures than we received in revenues. If we look on the right side of the graph, we're comparing 4 years of actuals in addition to 2 years of the budget. So it's extending it by 2 years. Projections from 19-20 to 24-25 show that expenditures will grow by 37%, while revenues will grow by only 30%. That differential in percentage represents about $4.8 million more in expenditures than revenues. This slide shows the growth in general fund contributions for the essential services indicated for both actuals and projected. The general fund contributes to such things as landscape maintenance, community services, public safety, fire safety, and transportation maintenance. These essential service costs have been increasing substantially. The blue bar shows the actual cost increase over the last 4 years, and the gold bar shows, again, a projection including the next 2 budgeted years. So you can see that the gold bar far exceeds the blue bar for these costs. The reason we're seeing these large increases in the projections is due to financial pressures, inflationary pressures that we all hear about in the local news. This graph shows the history of inflation in the Inland Empire over the last 3 years. These price increases show up in all the city purchases of goods and services across all departments. If you notice, the red line shows the inflation in the Inland Empire for the 3-year period, and it peaks in March of '22 at 10%. And then it goes down. Now, that's not a decrease in prices, that's a decrease in the increase of prices. And so as we look at this 3-year graph, if we look at March of '21, March of '22, and March of '23, we have to add those numbers together to get at our current price increase. So if we add those together over that 3-year period ending March of '23, we see an 18% cost of goods and services. And that affects everyone, the city of Chino, all other cities and residents as well. So this is causing the increases that we're seeing, as well as increasing population that the city's serving, as well as trying to make up for some of the deferred maintenance that we've done in the last few years, including the additional work at Ayala Park, cleaning the restrooms and trying to clean up the park and make it a nicer place. So that concludes my report, and I'm available for any questions that you may have on the slides.
Any questions for Rob? Okay, thanks, Rob. As Rob described, without intervention today, the city faces a true fiscal emergency that threatens the quality of life our residents and businesses deserve. Without significant additional revenues, the city will have to make drastic cuts, resulting in potential impacts to public safety, infrastructure, community services, maintenance, and public facilities. At this time, I want to invite up our Public Works Director, Hei-Jin Lee, who's going to talk to us about some of the impacts to public works with our infrastructure and our maintenance.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the...
Turn on your microphone.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for the opportunity to address the potential public works impacts of projected city budget. Since joining the city as the Public Works Director, I've been impressed with the staff's pride the staff takes in providing excellent service. As Public Works Director, my duty is to ensure that we continue to provide reliable infrastructure and to ensure that we properly maintain our infrastructure. Chino is a full-service city with a potable water system, recycled water system, sewer system, roads, traffic signals, and amazing parks for our residents and visitors to enjoy. However, as described by our city manager and finance director, without sufficient revenues to cover the projected expenses, we have to make tough choices when it comes to prioritizing replacement of aging parks, equipment, facilities, and maintaining street infrastructure. The city of Chino also boasts impressive and well-maintained park asset for our youth and families to enjoy. We have 26 parks with approximately 220 acres of city-maintained parkland. Public Works is responsible for maintaining these parks for various programs offered by Community Services, Parks and Recreation team. Each year, we negotiate in good faith for the lowest price possible for service contracts. However, we anticipate contract prices increase consistent with all the other consumer prices and services. Public Works Engineering Division manages the city's pavement management program. And our current pavement condition index is 70 out of 100, which is very nominal condition. Just to maintain this condition, the city needs to invest $7 million more per year, in addition to the $5 million per year that we are currently investing in the city's pavement rehab program. That is $12 million per year for pavement management alone. Engineers are also working to widen and extend Pine Avenue to address traffic bottleneck in the southern part of the city. This bottleneck constrains mobility for our residents and visitors, and this is a critical arterial street infrastructure project identified in the general plan transportation element and in the preserved development specific plan. Any deferred maintenance of our infrastructure would mean we will have to spend more money later for substantially more expensive option of reconstruction with added concern for public health and safety. We need to be proactive with ongoing efforts to protect city source water and provide quality drinking water to our customers in compliance with state and federal mandates. As a matter of fact, just last week, our water division received 100% compliance award for effluent discharge from our drinking water treatment plant to the Inland Empire Utility Agency. Right, and we would love to continue to provide excellent quality water and service of the highest caliber. And each year, EPA and State Water Board, it also introduces additional water quality tests, analyses, and reporting obligations. And these efforts obviously require qualified staff and appropriate staffing level, which impacts our bottom line. State water quality mandates requiring the city to capture trash before it is discharged into waterways, and for percolation of the groundwater impose additional infrastructure needs on the city. The compliance window for this mandate is fast approaching. Without an identified source of funding for this multi-million-dollar project to construct and maintain the required trash capture devices. The city also has our own fleet maintenance division with approximately 350 vehicles and equipment. And we also maintain all of our police patrol vehicles maintained by 4 mechanics and 1 lead mechanic. We anticipate addition to these fleet as city services grow. And our Public Works team is ready to serve and is committed to providing excellent service and highest infrastructure that the Chino community takes pride in and deserves. And thank you for the opportunity to provide this update, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions regarding Public Works? Okay, this is a team effort, as you can tell. So next, I'm going to ask our Director of Community Services, Parks and Recreation, Sylvia Avalos, to talk about some of the impacts in that department.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. The work of the Community Services, Parks and Recreation Department and their dedicated staff is to create community through people, parks, and programs that are integral to the Chino community. By providing well-maintained and accessible spaces for recreation and offering diverse programming such as counseling, senior services, social services, homelessness resources, before and after school care, youth activities, and citywide special events, the department's efforts create an environment that fosters community pride. Offering quality programs and services at an affordable cost will become challenging without adequate funding. We've already seen a high increase in operational supplies across all programs. To continue to offer youth activities and wraparound senior services at little to no cost, an increase of revenue will be necessary. Since COVID-19, the need for counseling, social services, and homeless services has increased. These services require specialized staff, such as licensed clinical specialists, counselors, case managers, homeless outreach coordinators, and police officers assigned to the quality of life team to meet the needs of individuals or families. Reducing these services due to lack of funding will impact the community as a whole. The increased cost of custodial services, utilities, and equipment, as well as the overall operational maintenance of city facilities, means there are fewer funds available to provide services. This will impact the number of days and hours we are able to operate if adequate funding is not available. Currently, the Senior Center operates 7 days a week. Decreasing funding will force us to reduce the hours of operation, negatively impacting a service that is essential to the senior community. The department promotes community engagement through citywide special events such as our fireworks spectacular, Halloween, and our youth Christmas parade and fair. With attendance from 5,000 to 12,000, these events are facilitated by the Community Services, Parks and Recreation staff and are supported by staff from Public Works and the Police Department. As the events have grown, the number of staff needed to operate a large event has also increased. Without the proper revenue source, these events will be minimized or eliminated. Most recently, we've experienced a doubling in the cost of carnival rides within the past 2 years. Additionally, there has been an increase in entertainment costs, event supplies, and contractual services. If additional funds are not secured, it will continue to impact the overall infrastructure of our public facilities, as we will need to reduce the maintenance schedule and defer construction projects due to lack of funding. As mentioned in the staff report provided by our city manager, the City Council adopted the Parks and Facilities Master Plan in 2022. This is a roadmap to help us maintain our parks and facilities today and into the future. Some of the public facilities include the Senior Center, Neighborhood Activities Center, Chino Youth Museum, Chino Branch Library, and the Chino Police Buildings. The master plan identified that we are behind in maintenance of aging facilities and are unprepared to accommodate expected new growth. Currently, we are deficient 25 acres of parkland and 67,000 square feet of community recreation space. The 10-year projection plan includes $40.5 million for facilities and park improvements. Years of deferred maintenance due to lack of funding for improvements have resulted in the aged conditions of these valuable public assets. Should the city remain status quo, these conditions will continue to worsen without adequate funding for existing, renovated, and new parks and public facilities. For example, additional amenities at Ayala Park have been placed on hold for 15 years due to lack of funding. Amenities include additional parking, a dog park, tennis and pickleball courts, a new playground, and a pavilion at the southwest end of the park. Most recently, we deferred a renovation project at Ayala Park due to the construction bid coming in at $2.5 million over the estimated project cost. Another project on the horizon is equipment replacement for 18 of our 19 playgrounds. The suggested life cycle of our playground equipment is 20 years. The city last conducted a citywide playground replacement project in early 2000, over 20 years ago. Since then, the playground surface and equipment have become worn and have become a safe concern. Our goal is to reimagine our park so all children of all abilities can use the playground equipment. No grant funds have become available for such a project at this time, and we cannot defer this project for much longer. With adequate funding, we will be able to allocate resources for scheduled maintenance and necessary repairs, enhancing the longevity and usability of these spaces for generations to come. By addressing accessibility concerns, upgrading facilities, enhancing recreation amenities, the parks and facilities will continue to provide an enriched experience for our Chino residents of all ages and abilities. This concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Sylvia at this time?
I think we'll hold our questions till we're all
Till the end.
done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sylvia. Next, I'd like to ask up our Police Chief, Kevin Menson, to discuss the impacts on public safety.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. As the Chief of Police, my top priority is to provide safety to our community. Here in Chino, we are seeing some of the same crime trends that are taking place throughout the state as a result of the state of California failing to keep offenders in custody. Calls for service are up 9% from last year, and last year the department responded to the most calls for service in our history. Despite the challenges imposed on our city by the state, our officers continue being proactive, keeping criminals out of Chino, as evidenced by our increase in officer-initiated activity, which is up 8%. The biggest challenge we are seeing here in Chino is theft, specifically retail theft, cargo theft, and robberies. According to the National Retail Association, the Los Angeles region ranked #1 in retail theft in 2021. Being a suburban city to Los Angeles, we are seeing these effects. This year in Chino, we have seen a 55% increase in shoplifting, which negatively impacts our business community and results in higher prices for everyone. I'll just point out a couple of big box stores here in our city where we have seen significant theft. There's been a 65% increase in the shoplifting at the 2 Target stores, 133% increase in theft at Dick's Sporting Goods. A lot of these crimes are attributed to organized retail theft. Not surprisingly, a significant amount of the suspects arrested are not residents of our city, but are primarily from Los Angeles County. Our investigative resources are stretched. We have one detective who is assigned to retail theft, but that is not their primary assignment. They're also responsible for domestic violence cases, forgery cases, and other assigned cases. We are working hard to address this crime trend through partnerships with outside agencies and retailers, in-house overtime details, and the use of technology like the Real-Time Crime Center. Our cargo theft is up 185%. The incident that occurred a couple of weeks ago where officers were almost ran over by cargo thieves involves suspect from Los Angeles County. Our robberies are up 24% from last year. A large majority of these crimes involved a retail theft where a loss prevention agent or witness tried to stop the suspect and it turned into a robbery. We have also seen an increase in armed robberies, which are mostly occurring in the middle of the night at our convenience stores. Many of these types of crimes are committed by gang members. Our officers work extremely hard in keeping gang members out of Chino. This is evident from our increase in productivity. Another challenge we are seeing is with our youth. We currently have 3 school resource officers at the high schools, and these officers are extremely busy. Our juvenile arrests are up 21% from last year. This is not a result of our officers making proactive arrests of juveniles. The overwhelming majority of these arrests come from our high schools. These are arrests for assaults, students bringing weapons onto the campus, students selling narcotics, and students making criminal threats. Our SROs only make arrests when the underlying conduct is serious. They work very hard in keeping our kids safe at our high schools. Unfortunately, junior high schools are now experiencing similar crime issues as our high schools. The department will need to deploy school resource officers to work with our junior high schools to address this trend. We have 3 junior highs in Chino, with the 4th opening up next school year in the Preserve. Having an officer assigned to work at the junior high schools first and foremost would provide a level of safety. They would also be able to connect with the students to provide guidance and mentorship before they move into high school. We did bring back the DARE program at the beginning of the school year, which has already been very successful in connecting and educating the 5th graders. Our city is growing rapidly in population, area, and geographic distribution of our residents, and in the number of new commercial and retail centers being added. Just keeping pace with this growth and navigating the legislative challenges we are currently facing is a challenge. To maintain the level of service our community expects and deserves to keep them safe, we need additional resources in the future. We are going to need additional patrol officers and dispatchers to maintain our response times. We're going to need additional detectives to investigate the crime trends I have described. We're going to need additional school resource officers to keep crime out of our schools. We will need to maintain our level of emergency preparedness. We'll also need the supervisors and managers to lead any additional personnel or resources. Securing adequate funding is crucial for both attracting top-tier applicants and retaining our experienced officers. Chino is a safe city. We can maintain that safety for our community if we continue to adequately staff our department to handle the challenges before us. And that concludes my portion of the report.
Thank you, Kevin. Mayor and council, I would like to thank you for hearing staff's analysis of our fiscal emergency and the steps needed to protect Chino's future. At this time, staff is recommending that the City Council ask Chino's voters to consider a 1% sales tax increase through the City of Chino Public Safety Roads Essential Services measure. This measure is being proposed to secure Chino's long-term financial stability and to maintain essential city services for our residents and businesses. It will increase the current sales tax in Chino by 1% from 7.75 to 8.75%. Of the current sales tax rate in Chino, only 1% is under local control. 6% goes to the state and 0.75% goes to the county. This year, Chino generated $274.5 million in sales tax revenue. 35.5% stayed in Chino, while the state received $213.2 million and the county $26.7 million. The 1% increase will stay in Chino to provide essential services and address infrastructure needs for our community. 1% equates to 1 cent on every dollar spent on taxable goods, or 10 cents on every $10 spent. For comparison, this slide indicates the sales tax rates in other full-service cities in our region. It should also be noted that sales tax does not apply to groceries, medicine, medical or dental services, real estate, rent, education, utilities, personal services, or labor. If approved, the measure will generate approximately $28 million each year moving forward, which will stay in Chino and be spent according to the community's priorities and cannot be taken by the state or other agencies. Should the revenue not be needed in the future, it may be ended by voters at any time. As you heard earlier, this revenue will help us maintain essential city services, including hiring and retaining police officers, maintaining fast response time for emergency and medical 911 calls, preventing crime in our neighborhoods, repairing local street, sidewalk, and transportation infrastructure, protecting Chino's local drinking water, improving flood control, maintaining local parks, community centers, and open space, and protecting programs and services for our seniors, veterans, and youth. Additionally, it will help us to address $260 million in unfunded infrastructure and neighborhood improvement projects. If this measure is not successful, the city may not be able to maintain the services and programs that provide the quality of life in Chino, and may require it may also require opportunities to secure Chino's future and may require cutting additional programs and services. At this point, it would be appropriate for the City Council to consider the recommendations outlined in the staff report, which include declaring a fiscal emergency to address future financial challenges, calling for a special municipal election, and its consolidation with the March 5th, 2024 statewide primary to put a sales tax measure before the voters, educate the public on the measure, and appropriate funding for the election. Approval of this council item will not enact any changes in services or staffing levels today. We are considering this measure to address future financial challenges, the effects of which are already being experienced. If approved tonight, staff will work to set in motion the necessary steps to place the measure on the March ballot, and additional information will be made available to the public online at cityofchino.org/Protect Chino Services. This concludes our report. We're happy to answer any questions you may have regarding this item. After your deliberation and before the vote, the city attorney will provide information on the legal aspects proposed tonight.
Thank you very much, Linda. What I'd like to do before we proceed with council questions and comments is I'd like to see if there's anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on this issue. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to council comments. How about if I start with you, Chris?
Well, first I'd like to say to city manager and staff, thank you for the report. It was very thorough and it was very, I guess, very upfront, very informative. And as I sit here, I just think of a couple things. Number one, when I ran for this position, when I ran for city council, one of the top issues, one of the top three issues that I mentioned were public safety, infrastructure, and fiscal responsibility. And as I sit here and and I listen to the report and I listen where we're at, as a city, I just can't help but think. But in 2020, when there was residents, primarily a lot of young residents who were fighting to to defund the police, the city stepped in and we paid no attention to that, and we supported our police, and here we are again supporting our police. And a big part of the reason why I ran was because I remember sitting back there in one of the council meetings, and there was a group of about 25 to 35-year-olds who came in, about 15 of them, and most of them not even from the city, asking our council to defund the police. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, well, you know, I sit here, you know, the same age group as these people here, and why the diversion? What happened? Why do I believe that, you know, we should, you know, keep supporting our police? And, you know, the same age group of people are thinking differently. That's what really inspired me to run for city council, just to show the youth that, you know, we need to stand behind our you know, our police and our fire, frankly. In terms of infrastructure, you know, riding my bike around downtown Chino here, I remember looking at, you know, just a lot of our streets, a lot of our alleyways. I just seen, you know, there was a lot of deferred maintenance on a lot of our infrastructure. And, you know, when I put together my package of my top issues running for city council, that's exactly why I included infrastructure. There was a lot of deferred maintenance, and I felt that, you know, in looking at just our general fund and our reserves, there was we were at a, you know, perfect opportunity to start, you know, investing in our infrastructure. One thing I've always, I guess we kind of share with our staff, and, you know, when sitting down with some of our council members and the mayor, one thing I've always mentioned was one thing that we believe, and I think, you know, you guys would, sitting there would believe as well, is that, you know, things are more expensive tomorrow than they are today. And so let's start investing as soon as possible. Now, in terms of fiscal responsibility, you know, in terms of fiscal responsibility, I guess the way to put it is I want to make sure that, you know, that the city's future is secured financially. I want to make sure that, you know, for the next generation of council, that, you know, they're placed in the right position to make, you know, big decisions like we've made in terms of infrastructure, for example, our street improvement program, or, you know, giving a raise to our police and, you know, things of that nature. In fact, that was my fourth issue that I raised during my campaign, was, you know, thinking about the current residents and the future residents. And, you know, as this report is given, I think of the current and the future residents. I understand the need, and I see the need. And ultimately, Mayor, I guess I trust that, you know, the public will make the right decision. Yeah, but that's it for now.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Mark?
You know, I mean, looking back, like, for example, when we first got into the pandemic, we decided that we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if we were going to lose a lot of sales tax. There was a whole lot of unknowns. So we made a conscious decision to defer a lot of things. For example, we didn't replace any of our vehicles, even though they were at that time should have been replaced, and particularly the police vehicles and some of our maintenance vehicles. And we made the conscious decision then to not do it. And then once we came out of the pandemic, we saw that we were okay. Then we found out that we couldn't buy any vehicles because there was no chips. And then when we were finally able to buy the vehicles, you know, we turn around, we buy 21 vehicles, and people start saying, well, why are you buying so many vehicles? Well, it's because we had deferred that for almost 5 years. And now, because finally we're able to purchase them, it's time that we purchase them. And they were expensive because, quite frankly, there isn't a whole lot of vehicles out there anymore. But that was an eye-opening experience. And then sitting on the Infrastructure Streets Committee, it's the same thing. So when I sit in there with Mayor Pro Tem Comstock and we look at projects, and the projects that we put off because at the time we wanted to hold back, now we're looking at those projects and they are 20% more expensive. And this isn't going to change. We already know that the longer we procrastinate on doing any type of infrastructure or anything that especially with our parks, it's only going to get more expensive. And I look at some of these cities like Claremont. Nobody goes to Claremont and thinks Claremont is in a bad situation. Nobody looks at Ontario and sees that they're in a bad situation. In fact, Ontario is booming with the retail and with their entertainment that they're bringing in. But they're forward thinking. They're forward thinking because they know in order to have a city that's vibrant, that can bring in entertainment, can bring in businesses, it's got to look good. It's got to have good streets. It's got to be safe. People got to be safe when they come here. They got to feel that when they come to the city of Chino, they're going to be okay. And that, unfortunately, is at an expense. It's an expense at a police department that's going to be expensive. It's a fire department that's going to be expensive. And we can sit back and we can showcase that although we pay a lot for our police and fire, we have some of the best fire and police departments here in the country, with their safe rate, the ability to save people's lives when they have heart attacks, to real crime centers that can actually see crime occurring. A lot of cities don't have those kind of things. So I look at this and I say, we do need it. We absolutely need it, because at the rate things are going, we need to make a change, and we need to make a decision. Are we going to be a city that's going to be forward-thinking, or are we going to sit back and not do anything? And then as a result of not doing anything, we start seeing other cities that are forward-thinking moving ahead of us, like your Eastvales or your Ontarios or even your Claremonts, where they have a vibrant community. And I think if we don't do this, we're going to start following behind, and we're not going to be a city that people are going to want to come to, because we're not going to be maintaining the things and the services that we should be maintaining. So I've had extensive conversations with different departments, obviously, because we sit on the different committees and how expensive things are. We've seen this for a while, and I think this is the right choice at this point. If we want to be the community that we want to be, this is something that we need to do to ensure that we're going to be a city that's going to be forward-thinking, and that we're going to grow and grow in the right direction. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Karen?
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things I did when I was still working as a professional was I read a lot of books about presidential history. In fact, it was one of the first books I read with my command staff was Lincoln on Leadership, but one that always stuck out to me regarding President Reagan, and I read a few of his, was he kept a sign occasionally on his desk that said, "Bad news is welcome here." And I think sometimes boards and people have to deliberate when your employees or people bring you challenging news. And reflecting back in 2018, when I was still employed full-time, we, as a team, always were talking about the future in Chino and how to plan for it and do things differently and make sure that we were secure in doing that. And then I retired in 19, and who would have known that we were going to face the challenges that we faced. And one of the things that we talk about is also what those challenges brought to us post-pandemic. So as the chief of police, when I campaigned to run for city council, because somebody made the comment tonight, other people were talking about defunding the police, and heck, that was my life's work, and I know that that's not the solution, right? Defunding the police properly, training them properly, securing cities is one of the hallmarks that Chino is proud of, and we should be proud of moving forward. So, and also, I did understand uniquely because of my position as a director that we've had several years of deferred maintenance and capital improvement projects that we have been wise. I think the council that came before me was wise in making wise decisions about which ones to fund during certain time periods and which ones not to. And it's based basically off of what we can afford to do at that time or what we can't. Because in the end, like people's home budgets, oftentimes there's never enough money to go around to solve everything. So I think the council that set up here for a long time and wise discernment made good decisions about what to fund and what not to fund. But I can also tell you, from stepping foot on one of the largest landowners and footprints in the city of Chino and the state of Department of Corrections, if we continue to do that for too long, that is literally like a prime example where time stopped, right? And if we continue to defer maintenance and not improve our roadways or our parks and our infrastructure, eventually it destroys the quality of life in our community like the state has, right? If you want to look at a comparison that's living here in our community. So it's time for us to look at how our revenues and other opportunities and the expenses that we're facing as a council, as a community, are outpacing our ability to pay for those things. And anybody that's still, working or having to budget for different things or having to go out and price different things, even personally or professionally, is certainly in realization of that. So, also, in speaking with my neighbors, as you can imagine, being homegrown in Chino, I've already had a few people reach out to me about their concern about this measure. And there's also an education component to it. A lot of people don't realize that a majority of our sales tax revenue goes right to the state of California. A portion of it goes to the county, and we receive the portion that was explained here tonight. Ultimately, this is up to the voters. Ultimately, this is up to the voters about the future of the city of Chino and how we want to maintain our community from a quality of life perspective. When I talk about not just roads and infrastructure, but our city facilities as well, for our senior center, for our recreation programs, and the things that we are going to be forced to build in the future and properly maintain those things. What I see happening presently in our community because of how the economy has changed is we have a set group of employees, and we're projecting what we're going to need, and our revenues, particularly from a sales tax perspective, is not keeping pace with the expenses of those things. So what we're asking the residents of Chino, and this is a difficult ask, is to consider how they want the future of our community to look. How do we want to maintain the level of our streets, as our Director of Public Works talked tonight? How do we want to, in the future, maintain our level of public safety in our community into the future, right? Where we're already facing pressures on all those things. Or our parks, how we want the appearance of our parks and our playground equipment to look in the future. And that's a difficult ask because sometimes people may not see some of those realizations in the future. So I think what the voters are going to be tasked with, should this council just decide to approve this measure, is an investment in the future of the city. And that's a hard ask, but I look at it also that, I guess I would offer this, is every day that we wait now to talk about these solutions could be time that we're wasting and collecting money to invest in our future. And after speaking with some of my neighbors about it, it's I'm sure some of the people that are sitting right now, probably in front of the TV, asking themselves who their daughter is speaking up there, is probably my mother and father who are watching this right now. And I'm sure I will have some hard questions to answer to them over the Thanksgiving table this week even. So, or even my local constituents that I see at my donut shop every morning. But I do believe that our staff has diligently delivered news to us that we as a community and we as a council have to take into consideration, because the wheels of government don't turn like a Ferrari. We can see this coming our way, and we have to take action now in order to make sure that we can prevent knowing what's going to happen. There are probably other cities or other councils who would say, hey, let's just kick the can down the road. I don't want to deal with it. But that's not this council, and that's not this community. And I agree with the rest of what's been said here tonight. I believe that the voters will make the right decision in this, right or wrong. And right or wrong as far as the voter sees it. If the voter sees yes, then we have work to do in catching up on lots of deferred maintenance, and to make sure that we can continue to serve our community in a manner which we become accustomed to and like. If the voters say no to this, then we will have to figure out something different. I'm hoping that people will take that into consideration while they're looking at all the facts of this issue. So that's what I have to say, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Kurt?
Thank you, Mayor. Folks like Councilman Flores had mentioned, when I campaigned for this position, my platform was public safety, infrastructure, as well as being fiscally responsible, and also economic development within the city. Looking at all those areas and how those areas right now are being affected, definitely affects our quality of life as residents. What do we want as residents and business owners here in the city of Chino. As the Mayor Pro Tem had mentioned, you know, we've come to expect a certain level of service that we've been getting for many, many years, and that's a testament to our city council and city councils in the past, what we put together. But we put that together as a result of what our residents and business owners wanted in the first place. So we look to see how much things cost, and we do the math and send it up to Rob, and Rob comes back with good news or bad news. We can afford it or we can't afford it. If we can't afford it, then we try to come up with some other funding options. But I mean, the bottom line is, what do we want in our city? What do we want to maintain? You know, our city touts this, Chino, it's the best place to live, work, play, and raise a family. Why is that? Why do we feel good about that? Well, it's because of the services that, again, that we've come to expect and to enjoy here in this city. Things are getting expensive. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. That's just life. That's the way things are going and will continue to go. I appreciate our staff and the thoughts about being proactive. You know, that's how you thrive, folks, about being proactive. You get a hold of it now so that when the rubber meets the road, we're not trying to play catch up. We are trying to catch up now in these deferred maintenance areas like the roads and park issues. Well, what does that do for us as well? Our property values go down. And again, we have to figure out what do we want. Other cities in the local areas around us have all instituted sales tax measures similar to this. Not all of them, but the majority of the cities, if you look, have all proposed it. It went to their residents and they voted for it because they want that quality of life in their communities. The city of Chino has set back on that a little bit to try to figure out what we can do without going and putting this kind of a measure on the ballot. But you know what? When you sit down and you start looking at the overall scheme of things and how we're $15 million short at the end of the budget year, where are we going to get that money? And we're going to have to pull that from our reserves. You know, in your own families, is that what you want to do? No, we have to do it though in our own personal families and out of our coffers. That's life and that's how things go. But what do you do to correct the problem? You try to be as proactive as you can and try to see the issues coming before you before they get here. $28 million a year that the potential revenue that we're going to get. Thank you, City Manager. That will be very helpful for us to stabilize and to maintain and continue to do the work that our residents want us to do and to provide. I think that it's a measure that I don't like taxes. I don't think anybody likes taxes, but it's something that is necessary right now for us to take a good hard look at. And it's going to be up to the voters, as the Mayor Pro Tem had mentioned. What kind of community do you want? Do you want us to shut down certain services so that we can pay the bills? I don't know. That's going to be up to the residents in this city. I would say no. I've also talked to my neighbors, and the overwhelming majority of them already are in support of this measure. A lot of people, or a few people, think that this money might be earmarked to go somewhere else that may not be fiscally responsible. And I would challenge those individuals that have those questions to do some research and figure out what the real deal is. And we're here as a council to bring this before the voters to make those hard decisions now. And when March rolls around, we'll figure out how this is gonna roll. But right now, I'm going to conclude my comments at this point, Mayor, before I start going off in another direction. But I just think that this is something that we need to be doing in our city.
Thank you, Kurt. Well, my perspective is very similar to what you've already heard, with a little bit of differences since I've been here for like ever. This is a very, very difficult decision to make. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. Nobody wants to increase costs. But the reality is the costs are rising, and we don't have the revenue to cover necessary expenses as we move forward. We chose not to defund the police. We have been fiscally responsible and cut down on expenses as much as we have been able to. We've deferred a lot of maintenance on parks and equipment, as you've heard council members already talk about. We've dipped into our reserves almost every year, minimally, while trying to actually build reserves up. Way back in the 90s, we actually instituted a utility tax for a while when we went through a recession, and we promised that we would do away with it as the revenue increased, and we did. We did. And we also vowed at the time, because we had to lay off employees, which personally broke my heart. I think it's the only time I've cried publicly at a council meeting, but we vowed that we would never again be in that position and that we would fortify our reserves, which we did. But we did that at a cost. In order to fortify our reserves, we had to cut back on services and defer maintenance, and we did what was required to ensure that we would be safe moving into the future if we were to hit another recession. And we did go through another one. We did not have to lay off employees. Our employee bargaining units were good enough to allow us to transfer people in between unions, which way they were very good to do, but we assured them that we would not lay off anybody, and it worked. But again, moving forward, as we all know with our homes, things have been more expensive, and so we've had to dip into those reserves. We, as a council, have made a decision over the last several years to take care of a lot of those deferred expenses. We absolutely had to buy police vehicles, you've heard that, and city vehicles, and they were, of course, more expensive, just as we're experiencing with our own personal homes and our own personal lives. But there are some deferred expenses that we just absolutely had to face. So a couple of years ago, I pushed staff that I wanted a multiple budget presented to us, 2 years and then 5 years and 10 years if we could possibly do it. Now, you know, looking out that kind of future, the numbers are not absolutely cast in brass, but it gives you an idea of where you're going. And it was quite shocking to see that in 4 to 5 years, our reserves would be gone if we kept up the services that we have now. Kept trying to do street maintenance, continued to support the police at the level that we have now, try to keep up with the growth that we're facing, trying to take care of crime, which is, you know, it's something that we can't control. We are affected by what's happening, and we're drastically affected by what the state of California is not doing, and that is taking care of criminals as they should be. But unfortunately, our legislative representatives in Sacramento choose to push that aside and, so to speak, put their head in the sand and pretend that through counseling people will be okay, just as the young people that came and asked us to defund the police. Well, if you just gave people their minimal requirements, they wouldn't commit crime, really. We know that's not true. So we are desperately affected by that. I've made some notes. I want to make sure I go through all of them. Making the utility tax decision was a difficult one back in the 90s. But we did it. We got through it. The citizens supported us. because we just laid out all the information in front of them, as we're doing now. We're totally transparent in this. We have stated what the money will be used for. There will be naysayers who will accuse us of using the money for something else. Well, we're not. It's written, documented what it's needed for, and we will hold to what our promises are. Now, if the citizens choose not to support the measure and vote no, we're not going to close the doors. I mean, we'll continue to do the best job that we can. But you have to understand that road repairs will have to go back, will have to be cut back. Police services will not be maintained. They will eventually have to be decreased. It's, again, as maintaining your own home. If you don't take care of your deferred maintenance, sooner or later, you're going to suffer some kind of destruction. Back when we instituted the utility tax, one of the fears that we had was that we would have to fence off the parks. We couldn't maintain them any longer, and that may be in our future if we don't get this measure passed. And this is not a threat. You know, I don't want the public to think that what I'm saying is a threat. If you don't pass this, you know, you're going to pay the price. That's not it at all. But you have to understand that we're looking at reality. We're looking at increased costs and a decrease in revenue. You can't afford to keep up your services if you don't have the income to cover those expenses. It's time to make a difficult decision. It's our job. And why now? Well, we could push it forward maybe another couple years and get to the point where you heard in 5 years our reserves actually will be in the hole. We won't have any reserves. We'll be in the red. I think it's $4 or $5 million. So actually in 4 years, we'll be down to almost zero reserves. We could push it forward another couple of years, but the expenses will be even higher. We'll be at a position where we'll even maybe need more money than just the 1% sales tax increase. So the decision time is now. We've asked for the information. We've gotten the information that we need, and we need to make the decision, and we need to put it to the voters to help us cover this very difficult time. Why sales tax? Well, sales tax increase is more fair to our property owners and our residents than a utility tax again or another alternative. Because a sales tax then is going to be contributed to by anyone who does any kind of shopping and purchasing in the city of Chino. Many of our roads deteriorate because of people from the outside that go through our community or come to our community. So anyone coming here to visit restaurants or retail shops is going to help us offset the costs of their impact on our roads. You've heard the chief talk about the criminal element that has hit our community. Well, anybody coming in, this is really weird, but anybody coming in to do dirty things in our community, if they purchase anything like gasoline or whatever, they're going to be also contributing to revenue. So people going through our community to buy gas is going to help us offset the impacts. It's just a more fair way of getting in revenue, in my opinion, than going to another utility tax, which only hits people that pay utilities. I wish there was an alternative. You know, we have looked at grants, and grants are wonderful to cover one-time expenses if you can get cooperation from a state legislature or whatever to help us out with some expenses. But it isn't going to cover everything. We have the little Chino Rancho Park that we've been working on. Linda, what was the original estimate on doing that park?
To 2.8 million.
Okay, 2.8 million, no, to do the whole park.
2.8 million.
And then the estimates came in, the bids came in, and what were the bids?
Well, we're at 5.4 million now to build that park.
So what was 2.8 is now 5.4. So those are the kinds of cost impacts that we're looking at, and we cannot absorb those types of increases. We just can't. preaching to the choir, I know everybody wants to make more money. You know, we're getting a lot of groups lobbying for their increases on their wages, which I totally understand, but you have to understand also that the services that you purchase, those are going to increase in order to pay their employees. So everyone's suffering these cost increases, including your community. We have a safe community thanks to the investments that we've made. Thank God for our police department and our fire department because they work so cooperatively together. We've got an outstanding public safety component in our community, and I would hate to see that decrease. We had a chief several years ago that talked about the broken window theory. And it's so very true. You know, you let something deteriorate, and then things around it deteriorate even faster. We don't want to suffer a broken window theory. We don't want to let crime start happening in our community. We don't want to have things deteriorate because once you go down that slippery slope, it's very, very difficult to recover and come back. So my plea to our community is please trust us. Please believe in your community and help us retain our safety and our services and keep the quality of life in Chino. That's all I have to say this evening. And unless there are some additional comments from council members? Fred? Well, I'm going to ask also is there anyone in the audience that has anything they would like to add? Okay, Fred?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and all those present. Your city manager mentioned that any revenues generated from this tax measure are available for use by the city for the council's priorities or your community's priorities. It's important to note that state law authorizes cities and county residents to adopt local transactions and use taxes, yet that is capped at 2%. So here in San Bernardino, the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority currently collects a tax, 0.5% of which was adopted by the voters. That leaves a 1.5% amount available for local sales taxes. So should the county or any other local district pursue a sales tax measure, those would also apply towards that cap. Once the 2% cap is reached in the Chino area, Chino voters would no longer be able to implement a local sales tax measure to support local city services. Instead, if it's a county tax, for example, the funding would go to a county pool and Chino would only receive a portion of those taxes to support its programs. If the Chino voters approve the proposed 1% sales tax measure, all of the tax dollars, as your city manager mentioned, will be allocated locally. And those would be available for supportive city services. From a procedural standpoint, the California Constitution requires a city council to declare a fiscal emergency whenever a tax measure is placed on the ballot at any time other than an election when council members are being elected. So the declaration requires a unanimous vote to proceed with placing it on the ballot in March of 2024, March 5th. State law also requires the city council to introduce the ordinance that is presented before you and approve that introduction by 2/3 vote, and then it is placed before the voters for consideration. And finally, the council may take this action as a collective motion and vote or separate it by the various components listed in the report. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Fred. I know it's a little bit confusing when you talk about the 2 cents total. I know SBCTA is considering another 1/2 cent sales tax continuation. If they do that, will that also count toward the remaining 1.5?
Well, the question is if it's a continuation or an addition. If it's an addition, then it would count towards the 2% cap. So that would leave less available funding for a tax measure for the city.
I think they're considering which way to go, because the funding that was passed many years ago for freeways and stuff just isn't enough, again, because of cost escalation. Another point that I'd like to make, too, that I forgot was talking about our surrounding communities and their tax rates. We and Chino Hills are the only ones now that have a 7.75, and I know, talking to the mayor of Chino Hills, depending on what happens with our sales tax measure, they're waiting to see what happens in our community. They are also going to go for a 1%. So, you know, it's reality and how you can try to cover your expenses that are going up to keep quality in your community.
That's right.
Yes, Karen.
Mayor, I think that's another important point that the city attorney just reiterated that I hadn't known, is that should those other entities decide to do a sales tax initiative upon the county or to Chino specifically, which would add to the sales tax, that while those taxes would be dispersed among the county for different projects such as transportation or other things. So I think it is important for our residents to know, like the mayor just pleaded, hey, this tax, those monies would be guaranteed to come specifically back to Chino, to the general fund. Unlike, you know, if there is an appropriation of an additional tax, of course, we'll be serving our neighbors in the county and things that we presently use as well. But there's going to be a window of opportunity for us to do that. And I would ask the voters to look at that as well. You know, carpe diem and the opportunity for us in the need to assure that those funds come back to the city of Chino.
Right. Any other points?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what the city attorney was saying, for example, in LA County, the majority of the cities are at 10% or at 9%. One of the taxes, actually two of the taxes that were passed there, that wasn't and a lot of the cities didn't vote for it, but because it was taken on a vote countywide, they ended up passing, and it ended up passing down to the rest of the cities, was they initially went for a half-cent for the MTA, to fund the MTA projects. And then when they felt that it wasn't enough at a half-cent, they went for another half-cent. And ultimately, the residents of LA County, no matter what city they live in, they pay a cent for the MTA transit system, even though the majority of people don't use it. And so theoretically, that could happen here, where an entity could come in and propose a tax. The city of residents itself could be voting it down, but if the majority of the county votes for it, it still gets implemented. So that's, at least we know that if, with this tax, if passed, it will all come to us, and it won't allow another entity to come in and say, well, there's an available amount of tax here that we can get from some of these cities, and then they move forward with taking that ability from us. That's all I have.
And I would say that's a very well put scenario, and essentially your residents would end up paying the same amount of tax if it reaches that cap, but it would not be locally controlled funds.
Okay, well, with that, then, I would encourage and ask for a motion to approve item number 14 and a second. Okay, we need a motion and a second. Okay, there's a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Comstock, second from Councilman Flores. Please vote.
And if I may read the title of the ordinance, since there
yes.
is an ordinance included, the motion includes all of the 6 items on the recommendation portion of the agenda, including an ordinance entitled, "An Ordinance of the City Council of the City of Chino, California, establishing a transactions and use tax to be administered by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration," reading by title only and waiving further reading. And as I had mentioned, that ordinance would be placed before the voters for consideration of adoption. Thank you, Mayor.
And the motion passes unanimously. I would ask, Linda, would you please explain to the public what will happen now?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. So after tonight's vote, we have a website that will be available to the public. I mentioned it earlier at cityofchino.org/protect Chino services. That will provide education for our residents on the measure, how it will be used, and what a vote would mean. So we're looking forward to providing that education to our residents. All of our employees here in the city of Chino will be available to answer any questions that our public might have. We're going to take this time as well to educate our community at different community groups. So if there is a group in the city of Chino that would like either a council member or one of our staff to come and speak to them about the measure and provide education, we're happy to do that. They can reach us at 909-334-3290, and we'd be happy to make that presentation.
We will also be doing City Hall on the Move pop-ups.
We're planning City Hall on the Move, which we've done in the past, at different locations throughout the city. The first one, I believe, we've got scheduled for December 16th, and then we're going to do 3 in January, so we don't have the whole schedule yet, but when we do have that, we'll be listed on our website so that our residents will know they can come and interact with the council, interact with staff, and be provided the information they're looking for.
Now, on our website, will we have a frequently asked questions section where if it seems that the public is asking the same questions, we can have answers that are already on there?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much.